Afternoon, everyone. That was me. Cool. Can everyone hear me all right? Sweet. All right. Let's talk about Scarfell. So as you all know, we started these games with pitches. Pitches were great, they're ideas, but ideas are foggy. And when we got the whole team together, we realized that everyone had a different idea of what Scarfell was. And a lot of teams faced this, in fact. So in the beginning, Scarfell was a lot of black and a little bit of white. Scarfell was a game where the world is shrouded in darkness now. The Shadow Realm has invaded, is murdering people, and you are the only person who has a light, a single torch, which can't go out. Something a little bit like that. When we started off, we started taking the little bits, the most solid pieces from the pitch that we could attach to. That our character was journeying with this torch. That she must enter the city. And at the very end, light this lighthouse, which will shred light back into the world again. So this is our first pass, a prototype. We wanted to start out by dividing the work. Interestingly, actually, the programmers were busy with assignments, so the producers actually worked on prototypes, while all the Trinity programmers, Trinity being the engine that we're using, the Trinity programmers got together and made a base project. In the beginning, to get something on the screen, we needed the producers to do something, so we prototyped. This is our first prototype, showing light, experimenting with how dark we can get it. And you see those little monkey heads that are trying to flee away from the light. We wanted to ask another question. How would light mechanics work in a combat scenario? So we made another prototype. And in this one, the character, who is the white block, pushes that cone around, which sheds light, and you see the enemies flee from it. And there's this prototype. I lovingly call it Baby Scarfell. A 2DX&A prototype, experimenting a little bit with mood, with pacing, and how some of those enemies might look in a more fleshed out environment. And this is all done very early on, answering some very important questions about what is Scarfell. This is our first talk about what the world would be like, that the character would travel through a forest, they would enter the city, and again to the lighthouse. We wanted everything to be iconic, that you could resonate with it, because everything else about the world you wouldn't resonate with. I mean, it's dark. It's really, really dark. This is our second iteration, which expanded, and expanded, and became this, where we mapped out how we wanted the player to experience the game. For today, we focused on the forest and exiting the abbey. In Trinity, you can define sectors for areas. So we wanted to design the level so that it fit within sectors. That way, we could, in the case of this presentation, you'll notice that although you see the forest trail and abbey, we actually show you a little bit of the ending in the fields as well. By sector-based design, we can swap out these sectors, and so we were able to pile in all the most interesting moments of the first level together, focus on those, and then expand it out later without having any downtime. One of the things that I wanted to talk about with the team immediately was the concept of milking stones, making something out of nothing. And the team took that very literally and gave me things like jointed trees, which using one tree model, you can then pose in Maya and then export out to add variety to the forest. And tileable archways, so that we can get a lot of bang for this buck. This is our character, an abbess from a monastic order that actually has that torch relic that she must take to the lighthouse. Throughout the environment are braziers, which we spent a lot of time designing, as you can see. These are the more finalized versions. These braziers are things that you can light with your torch to create larger areas of light. The braziers will extinguish over time, however, so essentially for the most part, only your light remains in the world. We also had our first enemy, and crafted a deterministic AI for cinematic style combat, which you'll see. In most games, you come up to an enemy, you fight them, it's like a pause, and then you keep going and you run into another enemy and you fight them. In this game, you'll see a more trickster-like antagonistic behavior. Finally, when we're actually putting the level together, we started with these primitive Blender mock-ups of them. This is a dark version of one aspect, and this is where the lights turned on. And this is when we modeled the project. And with that, we'll jump into the work. This is our character. A limited camera system. If you hit space, you can see from the front. Forward, up is always forward, even if you're facing this way. You're able to walk, evade when enemies come at you, jog, and sprint. The danger of sprinting, however, is that if you run into a root along the path, you might trip over it. So you have to be careful and watchful when you're sprinting. Up here you see our first encounter. The enemy can knock the torch out of your hands, as you can see. Some of the places where you trip actually won't drop the torch out of your hands. Some of them, however, will be less forgiving. Not all enemies will aggress you. Some of them will actually act more cautiously and back away from the light. As you can see, the enemy that I fought from before waited to see me before running off into a forest path. This is a brazier. As you can see, the enemy's trying to back away from it, but is destroyed by the light. The one who I fought from before, however, had escaped. You can also see an example of bioluminescence, which is another big thing in the forest level. Bioluminescence are plants that react to light and begin glowing in response to it. As I mentioned before, the braziers extinguish over time, and you'll see the fog start to fade back in. One of the abilities I forgot to mention, by the way, is, and you've seen me use it a couple times, is this flash that you can use with your torch. That's what you use to stun enemies, although it's not enough to defeat them. Here, the same enemy is running away while using the swarm to cover him. brazier. But then also add the intensity of your own flesh with the torch to finally finish him. Entering now into the field, some of the braziers will be broken and inoperable. We use 3D sounds throughout the level to add ambiance, which is very creepy with headphones. And although they'll probably appear a bit dark on the projector, we also have cloth rendering with flags. Because we're coming up to the city. And this is where we'll be focusing next. What happens after the gates open? So I wanted to show you not only what we had accomplished in Scarfell, but how we went about accomplishing it. Because ultimately we're trying to sell you not just on a game, but also on a team and a methodology. And when it comes to game design, unlike our characters, you don't have time to stumble around in the darkness. Thank you.